So welcome to This Cycling Life. This morning I'm delighted to be joined by Scott Sunderland, who is the race director for Flanders Classics, among many other roles that he is involved with right now. But rather than me saying too much, Scott, maybe you can give everyone a little bit of insight into how you're spending your time right now, and then we'll get into your life in the world of cycling.
Yeah, hi Jamie. So I'm General Race Director for the Flanders Classics races. So we've got more than 9 events that we're doing with Flanders Classics. And then I'm also Race Director, Teams Consultant for the Cadel Evans Gresham Road Race with Visit Victoria, the organisers, owners of the event. And then also Race Director for the women's and men's races of the Ride London. So that's London Marathon events. Unfortunately, we've had those cancelled, but they'll all be back up and running in 2022, so plenty to do.
Absolutely. And we'll come back and talk about specifically some of those races, I think, later on in the interview. But before we do that, Scott, I'm really curious to hear from you about how this all started. I mean, how did you first get into cycling, and what was it like growing up as a kid in Australia with a passion for the bike?
My dad came from Narrabri, so Western New South Wales. He was also in a cycling family. He's one of 8 kids, and they're all riding bikes, etc. So very strong cycling clubs and culture out there. So like Narrabri Club was 150 members. Moree, where the Sutton brothers come from. Jeff Skeins is also from there. So they also had a club of about 150. There was very strong culture back in those days of the late 50s, early 60s. Then my father moved across to Inverell with my mum, and my brother and I started racing. My bike literally come off the tip. It was an old 5-star Melbourne Star. My brother had a little 3-star Melbourne Star bike. So we took some school shoes, knocked off the heels of those, and tacked on some clips and pedals and stuff, and away we went. So I started racing at age 7, and my younger brother Peter 6, who's the father of Dylan Sunderland, who's racing with the Quebecer Assos team at the moment. And so that's how we kicked off.
Yeah. And you got into your teens, and obviously, cycling was a passion for you. When did you first start thinking about potentially making this your career, becoming a professional, and how did that evolve? Because, New South Wales is still a very far, distance away from the centre of cycling at that time, which of course was Europe.
Well, Inverell was far away from the centre of cycling New South Wales, being Sydney, which more or less, we had to do the 8-hour trial trip down to Sydney to be able to race at state level and state championships. And of course, in those days, you had to make a state team to be able to participate in the national championships. So that all started for me in that level of doing national championships, etc., around the age of 14. Then when I was 15, I had great success at 15, picking up medals and national titles and winning state titles, etc. And then when I sort of made the move to first year junior, that's sort of where I went, this is something I'd like to do for a long time. At that time, the dream was purely because it was so far away from the Tour de France. We didn't have social media or anything else, and everything you read about the Tour de France was a month or 2 months old anyway, by the time the magazines got there. And the tiny little bit you get in the newspaper, it was bugger all. So for me, it was all about the Olympic Games and World Championships. When I see the rainbow jerseys and the Olympics, well, everybody heard about that. That was always front page when they were on. So that was sort of the dream for me, to become a world champion or go to the Olympic Games, which I achieved neither. But that was sort of the dream sort of scenario. And it wasn't until
I remember that early days, Scott. I mean, what you were saying, because I grew up in Shepparton, a little town in country Victoria, and I remember me and my buddies, waiting. Actually, one of the guys in the town who was a very well-known cyclist in Australia was Richard Moore, and they had a Betamax video recorder, and I remember me and my mates waiting for the Betamax cassettes to arrive from Europe of the Tour de France and the Giro and Tour of Flanders, of course, and then all rushing over to his place to sit in the living room and watch it, but usually many weeks later. So Scott, tell me then how it that dream then evolved, and then your first kind of international experience, and then eventually moving to Europe.
Once again, I had pretty good success as a junior, picking up state and national championships, and also well, I've reached the top of the ceiling here in cycling in Australia. Where do I go? I didn't want to wait until I was 25 years of age. At that point, I was also looking for career-wise, going on to study, going to business, whatever I was going to do. So then the opportunity, I had an American friend I met in Sydney when I was living down there. So I moved to Sydney when I was 17, lived on my own. Hard days, very tough days. Then we decided to go to the States and do the tour of Texas and do some racing over there, which was a great experience. And that's where I met guys like Jesper Skibby and Rob Harmeling and John Tarlin, the Dutch guys and the Danish guys and a few of the French guys. And that's where I got, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to go to Europe now and race. So after doing nearly 3 months in the US, went back to Australia, pretty much won everything, including national championship. By the time I was 19, and then packed my bags and went to Switzerland. And that's where I cut my teeth and got my pro contract.
Yeah. And how was that experience, Scott, coming to Europe? I mean, obviously, you spent a few months in the US, but, you did grow up in a relatively, sort of quiet part of Australia, and then coming into that European cycling scene. A lot of guys obviously have, experienced success back home even at the national level, but of course, entering the European racing scene is a big step up, even when you've thrived, at that national level back home. How was it for you? I mean, what were the I guess biggest challenges or obstacles you had to overcome, and how you were a long way from friends and family? So how was that first, say, 6 months, a year for you?
The actual racing side of it went very quickly. So to adapt to that was fine. I was just sort of understanding, if you go to France, there's a certain style and way they race. It's also the way the races are organised compared to Switzerland. So I was living in Geneva, where I lived for 4 years, first 4 years of my career in Europe. So the biggest thing was the culture shock. Is language, the way people see things, do things, food, beliefs, everything is totally different to country town like Inverell. So that was a massive change. I mean, it's already, you talk about Shepparton or any other country town, going to Melbourne, going to Sydney, these are big cities. So that's already a massive culture shock for a young kid or a young man. And then to go to Europe, wow. So that was big. And for me, it's like, I was at school and getting French lessons and everything else, and the teachers having a crack at me sort of saying, Scott, you're not paying attention. And that's, look, miss, I don't need French. I'm going to become a builder architect, and this is probably what I'm going to end up doing, because this is sort of where I was doing with technical drawing and architectural drawing. So I never really thought at that time I'd be living somewhere. So in Europe, and in the first country I land in, what do I need? Speak French. So, pay attention in school. But yeah, look, that was the hardest thing. The racing was secondary. I think that was the easier part for me to do, because I knew how to be a good bike rider. I had the determination, I had the commitment. I knew what the hard yards and the hard yakka was that had to be done to be a good athlete. And I just needed everybody else to sort of help me come along. But that, as you said, not having your mentors with you, being your parents or friends or training buddies, having no money to call anyone. I couldn't just call because I just had no money. And my parents, I was one of 8 kids and 9 kids. And so, it was really struggle there on struggle street to get money. So, and just wasn't a possibility of doing it. And so, yeah, that was the hardest part, the distance and culture.
And you then, had a very successful pro career, but eventually decided to settle in Belgium. And what was the pull there? Why the decision to settle and as you are now, still live in Belgium?
Yeah, look, so I met my wife. I came to Belgium after being in Switzerland. Be close to the team. It's more centralised. Brussels Airport, you can pretty much fly anywhere in Europe. So it was a lot better as a hub. I mean, now we've got all these other companies who are flying. So from late 90s and 2000, you could pretty much fly from anywhere, and it was a lot cheaper. So that was a big attraction for me and for the team to get around. Plus the culture here was and you're just immersing yourself in cycling when you live in Belgium. I mean, there's a lot of young people, successful or not, who just enjoyed racing here in Belgium. So that was a big draw card. And yeah, I met my wife here, and then we got married and 2 kids, and which they're not kids anymore. They're 18 and 24. So yeah, it's been great. It's been a fantastic experience. And like I said, I just love Belgium and enjoy it heaps. And been here now since '91, January '91 when I moved here.
No, that's how life goes, Scott. You know, I think I met my wife's also Belgian, of course. I'm living here in Antwerp, but I met my wife in 2000 when I was working in London. You know, I actually met her on holiday, and she always reminds me that, you know, one of the first things I told her was that I was here for a good time and not a long time. My plan as well is to go back to Australia and you know, the country I grew up. But here we are, 20 years later, still in Europe. But yeah, Belgium is definitely great, amazing place to live if you're in the cycling.
Yeah, we had a stint back, like after doing the setup of Team Sky. I got in, you know, after a couple of years of doing this and being sports director, we decided to move back to Australia with the kids. And it worked okay. It was good. We were happy to do the move. But then we sort of just found it wasn't really sort of ticking the boxes for us. And so then we moved back to Europe again. And sort of I made a slower transition back. My wife and the youngest boy came back a bit before us. And then eventually older son and myself then moved back to Europe. And now my older son is back in Australia again. So we're tic-tacking back.
That's the way it goes. I always, you know, often... I have a lot of my Belgian friends, actually, a lot of my European friends say, "Oh, Jamie, you know, like why would you?" Especially now, right? We're in the middle of winter here in Belgium, cold snow, and my friends say, "You know, Jamie, why would you not go back and live in Australia?" And I always say, "Look, don't get me wrong, I love Australia, but Australia would be perfect if it was in the south of France."
Yeah, look, the distance is a killer. I mean, I hated it when I was a rider because sometimes, you know, particularly when you're having hard days, you know, you're going through a tough spell, whether illness or injuries, and you just sort of just like to be able to ground yourself a bit. But that, you know, we all know, anyone who does this trip, it's pretty much a 30-hour round trip. And particularly when you lived up in Inverell, if you want to go back home, it's not only just getting to Sydney, you still need to either try and get a flight or an 80-hour drive up to Inverell. So it's 2 days traveling. It's just so far and so much money when you're running life on a pretty much a shoestring budget.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, so talk us about that. I mean, obviously, you've spoken on, for example, Dan Jones' show and other outlets about your life as a pro, and you know, you did achieve and had a very successful pro career. But I guess what we're very curious about here on This Cycling Life is also talking about that transition. You know, we've talked to a lot of pro cyclists about how traumatic and how much of a struggle that is actually moving to life beyond the peloton. When did you start thinking about that shift, what you would do, and eventually how did you sort of find your way after your pro career?
I was probably forced into considering what my post-racing career would look like in '98, where I was hit by a car and had an accident. So I was sort of out pretty much 2 years. So at that point there, with being determined to become a bike rider again after the accident, and you know, 3 weeks in hospital and all the treatments I had to do, the rehabilitation, months and months, years of rehabilitation, which went far beyond even when I did actually start to race again. I continued for the rest of my career for the following 6 years. So that happened in '98, and I'd stopped at the end of 2004, just before I turned 38. So this whole period was pretty much until the end of 2003 was a period where I thought, yeah, I need to start, getting more experience and putting more tools in the toolbox here of what I can do post life, and start looking at what direction what I want to go, where I want to go, and what I want to do. To the point that in 2003, I was ready in November to announce that 2004 would be my last year. So that way I can just totally give focus to the races, enjoy the races. It'd be the last time that I throw my leg over the bike every time I started. So it didn't matter if it was rain, hail or shine. I was going to enjoy the day because it's the last time I'll be here doing whatever race it was. And it was good. It's probably one of the most, if not the most enjoyable year I've ever had on the bike was the last year. Where I think because I made that conscious decision, I was prepared to move on. I think that allowed me to enjoy it and get the maximum out of it. Where I see a lot of other athletes who are forced out of it, like it almost did happen to me in 1998. Through the accident, I was actually able to take the control and make that decision on my terms.
Yeah. And how did you? I mean, you mentioned sort of adding skills or to your toolkit. How did you start thinking about that? Because, obviously as a pro bike rider, you've so much of what you do is focused on training and nutrition and equipment. And so there's a whole bunch of skills involved with that. But of course, you did move on in your career into DS type roles, management, and eventually now into pretty much a general manager of major events. So, how did you, I guess, start to understand what those talents were that you had beyond the skill sets associated with actually riding a bike?
I sort of started analysing what I could do, what my attributes were, and where my strengths and weaknesses, blah blah blah. So my wife was a very big help in the communications, developing my own style in communicating, and I think that was the two biggest things is logistics. I understood logistics very well. After years and years of travelling and etc. and working to good schedules and timelines, and then being a good communicator. It's very, very important through communication. And then from that, leadership. And I think probably from my accident after that, I moved into teams consciously where I could be a key role in that, play a key role, particularly as I was getting older as well. I had the maturity to start showing leadership skills and take on that opportunity to become more of a mentor road captain for all the younger riders, but also sort of be that DS on the road within the race. So that form of the road captain, which was sort of crafted as I came into becoming a sports director, as you mentioned. So in 2004, discussions with Bjarne Riis at the Tour de France, he suggested I become a rider with his team and do that role within CSC. While it was interesting, I'd already clearly, as I mentioned, made that conscious decision. I didn't want to be a rider anymore. I wanted to stop. So we talked about that and we decided, no, okay, I'll become a sports director. And that was, which I never thought I would do, by the way. But I was ready for it, and the way that Bjarne Riis described the functions he wanted me to do was great. So that was to head up the research and development with the bikes materials. At that time, it was Cervelo and Zip, which are now like everybody knows very well. But at that point, they were not very reliable bikes, all wheels at the time. On contrary, totally not. So being involved in that, doing a lot of wind tunnel testing. Look at the training schedules that we're setting in the training camp. So, we were very much cutting edge on doing less races, but more training camps. So we had controlled environment and controlled efforts through to management of riders, leadership of the riders, mentoring of the riders. And then, of course, all the logistics that go around that. So, it was a great learning curve for me, one that I think I brought as much to the team as much the team gave to me. And from that, I was able to develop and hone other skills. And once I sort of thought, yeah, I've got that under the belt, then I looked at something new. And that's through just generally holistically just growth and experience.
Yep. I mean, obviously, you put a lot of forethought into that transition, and as you said, certainly with the support of your wife, we're able to understand where your talents lay and then seek out opportunities related to those talents. But that's not the case for so many other riders. And I mean, I'm sure you've met those riders during your career in the peloton, but also certainly post-career, being a DS, mentoring riders. Why do you think, Scott, that so few pro riders actually are prepared for that transition and very many of them struggle with it?
I don't know, Jamie. I was an Inverell, and it may, for the Australian listeners or viewers that understand it, we've got a university in Armidale, New England University, and at that time I was actually trying to do some sort of long distance education. And when I talked to the unis about this possibility, because for me, this point, I either go to Europe, become pro rider, join the army, which was another thing, or go to uni. Then I thought, if I could combine uni studies and bike, like I'm going to be over there a lot of hours after training and things else. But they more or less said to me, Mr. Sunderland, you have two choices, in the sports or an academic, but you can't combine it. And it's probably purely because it just wasn't set up. I'm talking about here back at the end of the 80s, so I'm talking 86, 87. And that just didn't happen. Now you can pretty much follow anything you want in the world, even become a bloody astronaut, I suppose. But look, so that's sort of where it was. And I think that sort of made me, learning languages, sort of just from a book and everything else, and everything I had to learn, you had to to commit to, whether it's through nutrition or training and everything else. Because I was sort of coming through that era where heart rate models were only just starting to be used, and then SRM power meters came to it. So you just really had to go out and looking for the next thing to try and be on the front of the curve. And that sort of taught me to be more insightful and searching for the next thing to move along. And I think for some guys, they just sort of think, well, I'll just put 100% into the career, but forget about, okay, how can I bring more skills to what I do as an athlete? They don't see themselves as the product. And I think for a lot of athletes, you are the product. So how can you make your product better? And that's most of it's through knowledge and gaining experience, as much experience as you can. And that's really helped me the most, is having lived experience behind me.
You mentioned, Scott, finding your way then, post race career, working with Bjarne Riis and CSC, and then. What do you think in terms of all those years? I mean, you retired at 38, so you had many, many years, big part of your life. I mean, you said you started cycling at 7 years old. So when you then maybe look at that in hindsight, I mean, what skills, attributes, behaviors do you think you acquired as an athlete that helped you in that later professional career? And what were the gaps? What were areas where you really realized you needed to work upon?
I think the key thing was communication, leadership, commitment, goal setting. They were the key things. Probably one of my weaknesses was asking for help, being too hard on myself, not sort of give myself a pat on the back, or at least sort of say, Scott, just take a breather here. Don't, just slow it down a bit. So self-management. I mean, talk about it every day now, burnout. Yeah. And some of my weaknesses was mainly in and around computer software and being able to work more efficiently in computers. And that came at the same time when the internet started booming. We're talking at the end of the 90s, coming in 2000. I had to give so much effort just to be a normal person, let alone an athlete again. So I've been found not 21% disabilities from my accident. So from where I had to work back from, so I had massive head trauma. So that was a lot of work I had to do to become just a normal person. It took about 3 years before friends and family said, you're pretty much back to the old Scott. But I was changed, because those sorts of things do change you. So I sort of had this gap there where I didn't really, and I wasn't able to give concentration and doing that sort of thing. So soft skills definitely is a weakness of mine, which at a later age I've been able to develop and become a lot better at.
And then when you say softer skills, because one of the things that has come up in conversations I've had with other high achieving athletes. I was speaking with Michael Rogers about this a little while ago. He said, when you are an athlete, when you are an elite athlete, you are so disciplined, you're so focused, and then you get into the world of work, into the world of business, and not everyone else is like that. And sometimes you can tend to be a bit hard on people, you can be a bit demanding on people. Yeah. Is that what you're alluding to when you mention soft skills? Is that tolerance or openness to other people's approaches to work or approaches to getting things done? What is it specifically around that soft skill stuff?
Yeah, look, there's some of that. It's being empathetic and able to see from other people's positions, because sometimes you tend to only see it from what you need and what you had, what you required to reach your goals. But that's not the same for everyone. So development of those, that definitely helped. I think just the communications and understanding how a corporation, because you're so much used to being in a professional team, which is great in a high performance corporate world. But when you're just working across the staff of like a team of 75, 80 people, there's other people there that just quite aren't not in that same league. So yeah, there's some soft skills that you need there with people skills and understanding each other's needs and requirements to work efficiently. So I could be demanding, and look, I did learn to apologize after an event. That sometimes it came to a point where a decision need to be taken that need to be done quickly, and I'll explain to you the reason why later. Let's just win this race first. But yeah, look, I have been known to be a hard ass. So in my days, I was the race director, team director within the team. I think I still am a little bit that way now, although I've softened a bit, I hope.
Well, maybe it comes with wisdom, Scott, moving into the 50s, Scott, I'd love to have an update. I mean, it's been fascinating talking to you about your life, your career, and the way that's evolved. But also, I guess over the last 12 months, you've really understood what it is to address uncertainty and ambiguity with so many events being cancelled. Can you perhaps talk to us what you've learned about yourself over the last 12 months, especially associated to your roles with Flanders Classics and the Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road Race and Ride London, and how you look at things moving forward now?
Look, it's definitely been tough for so many people. I mean, you sort of working in plans like Ride London. I've been working now with them for nearly a year and a half, setting those up. But yeah, we haven't been able to run an event, so that's really frustrating. And very much for them, because they're really venturing into new realms with London Marathon events. Cadel Evans Great Road Race as well. We were looking at really taking a new step forward. So that's quite frustrating as well. With the Flanders Classics events, pretty much we're where we wanted to be. There's a few things that we're looking at making changes. Once again, it's like so many other people. We just need this massive time out, and we need to readdress and first of all survive. So for me, it's patience. Really just sort of, okay, what can we where can we scale back, and how are we going to survive, and have the patience to persevere and get through this. But I'm a sportsman from heart. I've been on the road. I was spending anywhere 180 to 200 days on the road a year, and even then when I was sort of home or with the family, then we're in Australia, or so it was always movement. Sort of never in one bed. For many days of a year, and so now to just be forced to stand still and pretty much not do anything, and go for walks and go for rides, it's been an adjustment for so many, and that's the only thing that I've been able to do is just remind myself that there's so many more who've got it tougher and got it more difficult than me, and be aware of the environment around us, and give thanks for what we've got, and persevere.
Great. And Scott, the other thing is you obviously, you look in great shape. So you've told me that you still love riding your bike. You still ride your bike regularly. And how important is that to you to still, have exercise as part of your life? And, you've obviously had a lot to think about over the last 12 months. How has the bike sort of helped with that?
Look, the bikes, when I first stopped racing, I was very conscious to do at least a 2-year period where I just sort of weaned off the kilometres. I just didn't stop. A good friend of mine, Dr. Peter Moore, who was a doctor then, but he's also still working with ASOS Quebec team. He said too, if the slower that you can transition the bike, the better you can maintain a healthy body and healthy mind, etc. So I was very conscious, and I was still working within the sport, within the teams. Becoming a team director of the team, I was always with the team. So I was either riding my bike when I was back in Belgium, or I was riding with the team when I was away at races whenever I could, whether it only be an hour or up to 2 hours. Then I was, try to do a little bit of running, which doesn't really work for me because of back injuries. Then it comes down to walk, just generally keeping fit or doing something. So I sort of try to, the bike is a lot of fun, but I also need alternative things, whether it's cross training or going to the gym or just doing hikes, so forth like that. Swimming, I love swimming in the surf. So not too easy to find a beach in Belgium, but or close by, or when you're on the road. But doing these types of things is great. So I sort of narrow it down to, for me, healthy mind and body. I tend to put the mind before the body now, is just having activity. So I at least try to get 6 hours of activity in a week. That seems to be plus or minus that 5-6 hours a week is a good balance for me. If I can get more, great. But if work or commitments don't allow, then that'll be about it.
Excellent. Well, Scott Sunderland, thank you so much for making time for us for this TCL interview. For those of you watching, of course, if you have enjoyed this conversation with Scott, please do give us the thumbs up. And of course, do subscribe to the This Cycling Life YouTube channel. Scott Sunderland, thanks again for your time and wishing you every success for 2021 and beyond.
Thank you very much, Jamie.